This video was brought to you by Bellroy. On Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak performed a headline-grabbing cabinet reshuffle, sacking the deeply unpopular and controversial Suella Braverman and appointing former Prime Minister David Cameron as Foreign Secretary. Now, these moves made waves in the international press and restarted a debate in the UK about Cameron's questionable foreign policy record. But leaving aside Cameron's foreign policy instincts, perhaps the biggest risk for Sunak is how this plays for the right of the Conservative Party, who have reacted furiously to what they see as a pivot to the centre. In fact, by Monday evening, right-wing Tories were already convening in the Commons to decide their response. And at least one, Andrea Jenkins, has publicly declared no confidence in Sunak, stating in her letter, "The polls demonstrate the public reject him, and I am in full agreement. It is time for Rishi Sunak to go." So in this video, we're going to take a look at what happened earlier this week, whether Cameron is a good appointment, and if Sunak's reshuffle could split the Tories. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, let's start with a quick recap of this week's events. On Monday morning, Rishi Sunak announced a much-anticipated reshuffle, triggered by the sacking of the then Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who'd made a series of off-script comments and last week published a controversial article in The Times accusing the Metropolitan Police of being biased towards pro-Palestine protesters. Now, the article was controversial not just for its content, but also because Braverman apparently ran the article through number 10 first, as ministers are supposed to, but then ignored the proposed edits, which would be a violation of the ministerial code and therefore cause for resignation. Anyway, while that was big enough news in and of itself, what was even more headline-worthy was the return of former Prime Minister David Cameron, whom Sunak had now appointed as Foreign Secretary after moving James Cleverly to Home Secretary. As David Cameron isn't a member of Parliament, and hasn't been for 7 years, in order for him to serve in Cabinet, he was urgently appointed to the House of Lords. Now, while it's rare for a Secretary of State to come from the Lords rather than be an elected MP, it's not totally unprecedented. Under Gordon Brown, for example, Peter Mandelson served in Cabinet while being a member of the House of Lords, and Margaret Thatcher's Foreign Secretary was a Lord rather than an MP too. Regardless though, Cameron's appointment has sparked a lot of debate in the UK. Now, Cameron's proponents argue that he'll bolster the UK's international credibility and provide, if not competence, then at least some experience in foreign affairs when it's most needed. And real experience can be a rare thing. That's in part because the UK has a bad habit of recycling ministers far too quickly, with ministers rarely getting more than a year or two in position, which is, well, just bad. A couple of years is hardly enough time to get your head around a brief, especially when it's something as complicated and broad as foreign affairs, which means that we often get bad policy and UK politicians lack clout on the international stage because they're rarely there for long enough. It's also arguably good to see a senior politician returning to the fray. With the notable exception of Theresa May, senior British politicians, especially former prime ministers, usually just leave politics the day that they've lost their post. This didn't always used to be the case. In previous eras, former ministers stuck around and used their wisdom and experience to help subsequent governments, and Cameron's return is a welcome reversal to this trend. Domestically, Cameron's appointment should also do the Conservatives some favours with more centrist voters, especially those in the so-called Blue Wall, who were very keen on Cameron back in the 2010s. Nonetheless, not everyone is convinced. For starters, whatever you think of him as Prime Minister, Cameron doesn't have a great track record on foreign policy. When he came to power, his main foreign policy objective was buddying up with China. He declared a golden era for UK-China relations in 2015 and was the only major Western country to sign the founding charter of China's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, much to the irritation of the United States. Unsurprisingly, this policy imploded soon afterwards, especially when China cracked down on Hong Kong. Cameron's intervention in Libya is also widely considered to be a failure, After all, Libya is still broken over a decade on, and the UK's experience there convinced MPs to vote down Cameron's attempt to intervene more directly in Syria in 2013. Finally, Cameron should also take at least some of the blame for Brexit. After failing to negotiate a better deal with Merkel and the EU, he called a referendum, lost it, and then resigned. It's also not clear that all of this will help Sunak's polling domestically. Cameron's own approval ratings are relatively low, not helped by a series of lobbying scandals. And his appointment also utterly undermines Sunak's new pitch as being a change candidate, exemplified by his recent efforts to create distance between him and Labour on net zero, immigration, and cultural issues. But perhaps the biggest risk for Sunak, and in fact for the Conservative Party more widely, is not how it affects his foreign policy or his poll ratings, but how it plays with the right of the parliamentary party. That's because there's currently a deep divide between the more centrists and the more right-wing Conservative MPs. To keep his party more unified, Sunak has tried to keep both sides on side by basically appointing ministers from both factions and implementing what we might describe as centrist economic policy while taking a more right-wing stance on societal policy, including stuff like net zero and immigration. Suella Braverman's sacking and Cameron's appointment, though, suggests that Sunak has essentially given up on keeping the right on side. But while this is understandable, in that the party was already pretty divided anyway, and it might help him pick up blue wall voters, it also really risks a backlash. A number of Conservative MPs have already explicitly criticised Sunak's decision. Jacob Rees-Mogg told GB News that it was a mistake because Suella Braverman had her finger on the voters' pulse, while Simon Clarke used Raheem Sterling's exclusion from the England squad to warn Sunak that it's never wise to lack options on the right wing. Now, while only one MP has so far publicly announced sending a letter of no confidence to the 1922 committee, even if Sunak avoids an outright leadership challenge, outright political warfare within the Tories could be disastrous for both his poll ratings and for the party itself. Two things he undoubtedly wants to avoid. Now, when it comes to our journalism, you clearly expect us to provide high quality and responsible reporting. But shouldn't you also expect the same from the products you buy? I certainly do, and that's why for the last few years I've been exclusively using wallets, phone cases, and passport cases from Bellroy, which is why I was super excited to hear that they wanted to sponsor some of our videos. As a loyal Bellroy user for the past few years now, I know quite how reliable and high quality their products are. My current phone case, for instance, is beautifully minimal in this stunning terracotta leather. That leather, by the way, is eco-tanned and achieved a gold rating from the Leather Working Group, recognizing excellence in environmental and labor practices. It's also just a beautiful, high-quality material that, in my experience, only gets better with age. Bellroy don't just talk about their environmental credentials either. They're also an officially certified B Corp company and have upcycled 10.5 million plastic water bottles, used 60,000 kilograms of industrial nylon cutoffs, and saved 15 million litres of water by using dry tan leathers. Their products are also just great to use. Designed around principles of minimalism, all of the Bellroy products that I've bought have been beautifully designed and easy to use, with their bags optimizing for functionality and efficiency, and their wallets are slimline enough to fit into any pocket. So find out why I've been using Bellroy for years now, and check out their huge array of products by clicking the link in the description. Plus, when you do, you'll get 10% off anything you order. Thanks to Bellroy for supporting the channel, and thanks to you for using our link.